Good evening. Tonight, News Gang starts with what would normally be our final words in the show. Our last words will be our first words tonight because, let us face it, Kenyans, this was not a normal day.
Indeed, it was not a normal day. From the early hours of the morning, the day displayed all the signs of an ominous day in Kenyan politics.
And ominous it was. The context is the 6 by-elections that were taking place in various parts of the country. And when the polling stations opened at 6 a.m., it never took long for things to go ugly and generally take the wrong direction.
And the wrong direction matters went today. From Matungu to Kabuchai and Kiamokama to Nakuru's London, it was a spine-chilling curtain raiser of not just what can go wrong in a day of by-elections, but also what could go terribly wrong within the general election in 2022.
Now, it is because of that repugnant curtain raiser that the News Gang chooses to speak out tonight with all the urgency of now. The urgency of now because if something does not change now, then the events we saw today could end up looking like a children's picnic next year.
We make reference to children here in no complimentary terms because much of what was displayed in our politics today was both infertile and dangerous. This is the day that betrayed our political soft underbelly. We saw not just violence, but the utter absence of maturity. We saw not just recklessness, but outright hot-headedness.
Now, hothead, where I come from, is not a flattering description, much less so when the subjects in reference are adult leaders, grown-up politicians, or even uniformed administrators. Watching some of the early clips out of Matungu and Nakuru's London ward was an agonizing experience, as the players involved displayed everything leadership should not be associated with.
Tonight, we use the term leadership sparingly, indeed, very reluctantly. Members of parliament, senators, some administrators, and a former cabinet secretary that were involved in the day's ugly events make it extremely difficult for anyone to talk of them as leaders. What we saw, and let us not kid each other here, what we saw are goons bursting with privilege and money and a wild sense of entitlement. Period.
And we will be brutally frank with you tonight. In just one day, we have witnessed how much disturbance and irresponsible, arrogant, self-absorbed bunch of political and administrative players are capable of. Today, a former cabinet secretary slapped an election official. Elected leaders and administrators publicly exchanged insults, and overall, order at the voting stations was disrupted.
An IEBC official, a woman, was stripped of dignity. She was frog-marched by goons. Her hair pulled and insults flowed freely in her direction. Elsewhere, a man walked half-naked, a victim of another violent act in Matungu. And what we must wonder today, where were the law enforcement officials? Where were the police that usually accompany election officials or keep peace at polling stations?
And then there were the so-called leaders. Arguments with police officers quickly degenerated to tear gas canisters and general mayhem. A member of parliament will be remembered for that almost iconic photo of him kicking a tear gas canister back at the police. Another group of 4 taunted policemen while being arrested, while another one aggressively charged at police officers, claiming to have lost, listen to this, 2 million shillings.
2 million shillings in cash on an election morning. Claims of voter bribery were rife in Matungu and Kabuchai, as they were in London ward Nakuru. But this was just one of the excuses for a day that saw a spine-chilling breakdown of political and administrative discipline. Which is why tonight we are very worried about 2022.
Indeed, we are worried about 2022 because if the events of today are anything to go by, then we are in for troubling times. You see, this was just a by-election of 2 constituencies and 4 wards. This was not a national election. A national election involves 290 constituencies, and there could be more in the next election, and more than 1,400 wards, which could also grow.
What that means is multiply the indiscipline, the violence, the chaos, and general breakdown of law and order witnessed today many times more. We are worried about 2022 because the attitude displayed today is perhaps the most dangerous to be witnessed in competitive politics in recent times. An attitude whose net effect is the relegation of the voter to the background and the elevation of other factors that include force and indiscipline to the driver's seat.
Yes, indeed. This day cannot in any way be described as the day of the voter it was supposed to be, which is why we are worried about 2022. If the voter will not be able to peacefully line up, cast their vote and leave the polling station, then we have more to worry about in 2022 than our usual contested tallying of votes.
We are also worried about our clearly short national memory. I mean, how do we forget so fast? Events today demonstrated that we have learned between little and nothing about the 2007-2008 post-election violence and the 2017 nullification of the presidential election results.
Yes, 2007-2008. Let's remind you again, at least 1,300 innocent Kenyans died in the post-election violence that strictly were a culmination of tense political and administrative dynamics that dated as far back as 2005. We remind you again that because of 2007-2008 violence, the International Criminal Court landed on our shores and carted away politicians, administrators, and a radio presenter to The Hague for an international crimes case for which the head of this country remains hanged in shame to date.
And we need to mention that the ICC cases were never really closed, but in relation to the events of today, the ICC cases, like the by-election violence witnessed today, confirm to us a consistent pattern. In moments of national rupture, the leading suspects will be our politicians, our administrators, and even our police, just like they were in 2007-2008.
2007-2008 is the reason we will fall just short of submitting our list of suspects should anything go wrong in 2022. But we all need no other hint than what we witnessed today. Our politicians and our administrators have proved that in contests they themselves define as high stakes, the national self-destruct button is not off the table. They have shown us today that for a parliamentary seat, or even that MCA seat, they would rather burn the country than lose the vote. I shudder at the thought of the presidency, which they consider the mother of all high stakes.
And high stakes 2022 shall be. One fundamental flaw that worries us about 2022 is the overall quality of nearly the entire crop of national leaders today. They swing dangerously between the selfish and the hot-headed, the arrogant and the self-absorbed, and overall, the most entitled and responsible generation of leaders the country has ever seen.
Overall, we are worried about 2022, and we propose a simple remedy tonight. Between President Uhuru Kenyatta, Deputy President William Ruto, and ODM leader Raila Odinga, these three men now need to reflect deeply on what we should well describe as their collective time as the top leaders and as leaders in our generation. Gentlemen, take this country and your responsibilities seriously. Newsgang can begin now.